In this series of videos, I began with an introductory one which put forward the dilemma of good and evil, and then following with three videos which are my three ways of addressing this issue. Second video, I looked at the simple idea of good versus evil, a binary situation. You know, whether it's capitalist, communist, God, devil, black, white, whatever, man, woman. The idea that there are two distinct opposites, and that if one of them is considered to be evil, then the nice simple idea, you get rid of it, and that solves the problem. And I point out that actually that is very seldom works, because each has a seed of the other in it. In the second one, I again looked at the East is East, West is West, the divisions which we're faced with in society, which often turn out to be fake, in the sense that what actually was a continuum between two extremes of many shades of grey has been arbitrarily split into two, and we're expected to fight battles one against the other, in what is actually a continuum. Now, both of those, in a sense, are tricks. You know, it's the trickery of thinking of something as pure evil when actually there's always a seed of the opposite in it. And the trick of thinking you've got two opposing forces when actually what you've got is a complete spectrum between. Now, in this third example, I'm also looking at tricks. It's fundamentally about the trickster. And what this method is when you think you've got a clear binary situation, whether it's actually a continuum or two opposites, look for a third principle. Now, when I put that to people, they tend to say, oh yes, I quite agree, you know, the sensible middle path, yes, you know, forget the extremes, it's sensible. Now, I'm not talking about that, because in a sense that idea of a middle just affirms the one dimension you're given between good and bad. You know, right wing, left wing, oh yes, a centre party, really just affirms the fact that the division is between right and left, because there is a centre. Now, I'm talking about a third principle which is quite independent of the other two. And it's a way of thinking which is not very much applied in our society. And so I'm going to do it by examples, then try to sort of sum up what it's about. So, you might have thought from those first two videos that I'm arguing that actually there are no true polarities. They always contain a bit of each other, or else they're actually an arbitrary split. That isn't quite true. Because here's an example of a genuine black and white polarity. It's a game of chess. When you're on the board, a game of chess, there's black pieces, there's white pieces, there's black squares, white squares, there's no grey in between. It's absolutely clear-cut polarity. And if you're down on that board, the whole thing is sheer murder. It's just piece after piece being killed, shoved around and killed. And the old slaughter, what's the point of the slaughter? It's try to capture a king when you've already got a king, you know. Nonsense. It's sick. So what is the third principle that is making all this happen? And the answer is the player, the person looking down on the board, moving those pieces around. Now, I give that example because I want us to look at the characteristics of that third position. Firstly, it is in a sense invisible. What I mean is that if you're on the board, black piece, white piece, you don't get pieces saying, oh, I think I can allow myself to be captured because I think the player will like that. No, there's just the two colours there. You're not aware of the fact that there's another viewpoint looking down at the board. So it's hidden, if you like, secret. It's hermetic. Secondly, it's intelligent. There's a mind up there playing these tricks, moving these pieces around, pieces on the board just get moved, whereas there's something up there. It's clever. It's detached. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but the player might be furiously into the game, really passionate about it. Yes, but from the point of view of a pawn being slaughtered or something, it's a detached mind up there, just moving the pieces according to it. It's attached. It moves between worlds, because that mind can think about the black pieces, think about the white pieces. It can move between those two and decide what ought to be done, and so on. Detached, clever, and it's playful. The person up there is called the player. What is murder down here is just a game. I say just a game, because a game can be very serious, but it is a game. Now, I've chosen those words rather carefully. Player, detached, clever, tricky, because what I'm suggesting that this third principle is, in traditional terms, it's mercurial, or in terms of sort of more shamanistic religions, it's a trickster. Something lies outside and pulls the strings and makes things happen, and that is the sort of third principle we're going to look for in these examples. If I take another very obvious polarity, absolutely fundamental word, man-woman. Now I'll just say in brackets that that's a very traditional black and white polarity, but in recent thinking it's being seen a bit more on the lines of what I said in the second video, is actually there is a spectrum between the absolute stereotypical uber male and the extreme feminine, and that most people are somewhere in between that line. But for now, I'm just going to go back to the straightforward idea of man-woman, a polarity. So what could be the third principle of man-woman? My answer, think mercurial, the child. Now, it's very obvious that when man and woman get together and have a child, the sense in which that child begins to be the trickster that's pulling the strings, because when things are going very well, they're both sort of focused on the child's the future, and also when arguments develop, very often the resolution is, well, actually we've got to think of the child, and so on and so forth. So it seriously is the one that pulls the strings. It is sort of making this game. But most people will say, yeah, but I mean, only a very small number of man-woman interactions involve a child. And I would say, no, the whole, even if you're just looking for mental stimulation or a workmate, the whole of man-woman interactions are actually laid down by millennia of evolution in its nature's trick for making children. All this men are for Mars, women are for Venus type stuff, it's evolved towards making children, even if it only happens once in 1,000 times. That's what it's all that's what the pressure is all along. And so I would argue that the child is the trickster, the third element, which is always there in the background, even when it's not admitted or not seen. Now, rich, poor is a very painful binary in our society. The rich, the poor, the opposition between them. And you can imagine a man who came out of nowhere from a very poor family and has gone up in the world, and he started business, and he's now the rich tycoon in his Rolls Royce, driving past all these beggars, these losers, these people who didn't have the guts to get up and do something, and feeling that he's reached the top of the stack. Now, that dilemma of rich-poor, which can seem so absolute, of course, you just have to think of all those stories and films about people who are destitute, perhaps in a third world country, as shack dwellers, and typically the father says, I'm going to put everything I've got into educating, and it's usually the son. I don't want him to end up like me. I'm going to have him educated, and then he has a chance of getting out of all this. And the third principle here is education. And it works both ways. There's the rich man in his Rolls Royce, and what's he do? Now he's got everything. He sends his children to a very posh school. And the sort of thing that then happens is, oh, Daddy, by all means come to the sports day, but for God's sake don't come in the Rolls Royce. It's so nouveau riche. It's embarrassing. And he's thinking, this is a symbol of everything I've aspired to. The education not only is a way of going up through that spectrum, it's also the thing that makes you realize there's more to life than rich and poor. Another example that might seem very sort of clear-cut is the introversion-extroversion thing, if you like. The outer world, the world where we have to earn a living, the world, the physical world around us, the senses, the wind, the rain, business, other people and all that. And the inner world. You close your eyes and you dream and you have visions and you have that inner world. You have your own dreams at night and so on and so forth. What's the third principle there? And I suggest consciousness. Consciousness is like Hermes, the psychopath that goes between the living and the dead. Consciousness goes out to that outside world. It goes deep down into the inner world. It flies between the two, and it is a third principle. It is neither inner nor outer. It is everywhere, if you like. Now, this is the approach that I was talking about in this book, the good, the bad, the funny, and I was exploring it. And the basic principle, what I'm saying, is that we've been brought up in a world which basically has a religion of God and devil, a duality. And we tend to divide everything into the good and the bad, rather than admit that I'm potentially bad, I must be the good, and so out there is the bad. We're absolutely, and in the previous video I've argued how this is actually fundamental to thinking, this sort of binary split. Now, what this book says is, but what if we were brought up with a religion that had three characters in it? God, devil, and trickster. The good, the bad, the funny. And it's not a hierarchy. There are three equal, it's like a triangle. They're three equal and independent things. Now, you see, because of the sort of religious background we have, people tend to collapse that. If there's a trickster figure, they tend to see it as evil, the wicked Satan playing his tricks, the deception and all that. Obviously it's on the evil side, but I say no, like the player in that chess game, it's actually an independent thing. It's pulling the strings, it's being naughty at times, it's being funny. Humour is another of the elements. And what I argue is that that this type of thinking is not alien, it's not something new. It's there, but it is underused. It's been played down in our society. And examples of that I gave were, if you ask people about alchemy, the man in the street will say, oh yes, that's turning lead into gold, isn't it? In other words, people know about the dualistic aspect of alchemy. There's lead, there's gold, and you can transform them. People who know a bit more will say, oh yes, there are four alchemical elements on the earth, air, fire, and water. But how many people will immediately think of the three alchemical principles, sulfur, salt and mercury? Much less emphasis on that. Ask people about astrology. I'm an Aries. Oh yes, that's a masculine positive sign, Aries, yes. They know about the male, female, masculine, feminine sides, the positive, the negative as you go around the zodiac. And even more so, they know, oh yes, it's a fire sign. They know about the elements. But you'll hear less people saying, oh yes, it's a cardinal sign. People are not quite so clued up with cardinal, fixed, mutable. Now, if you explain it, it's tempting to try to sort of line those up with the elements. Cardinal, that's the initiating, it sets the thing going. Well, that's rather fiery, isn't it? Oh yes, fire, okay, cardinal. Fixed is what sustains, nourishes and keeps the thing going. Earthy, yeah, that's like earth, isn't it? You know, the solid, it's fixed. Mutable is where it is now ready to shift into the next cycle. Changeable. Well, that's air, isn't it? Well, what's happened to water then? It doesn't fit very well. Now, in the book, I start with playing a trick on the reader. And basically it involves a discussion where it worked towards defining 4 archetypes, female archetypes. Mother, daughter, Amazon, witch. And I talk about this a bit, and then I say, well, what's that got to do with the threefold goddess? Maiden, mother, crone. And I do a similar thing. Well, the mother, someone see the mother, you know, that's straightforward, yeah. Maiden, well, I suppose that's like the daughter archetype. Crone, well, it could be witch, except witches don't have to be old. Where's Amazon? Doesn't fit well, you know, perhaps Amazon is just a sort of projection of the male mind or something. It doesn't fit. And I realised that threefold thinking is not just a sort of simplified version of the 4 archetypal analysis. It's actually a different way of thinking. And the most significant difference is that it's not types, it's not categories, it's a flow. It's got a time element in it. Because the maiden is the young woman, it is the waxing moon. The mother is the woman at the height of her abilities, which could be actually being a physical mother, or it could be founding a house, an establishment, a home, or it could be a business. It is that sort of brightest light of the full moon. And then the crone, the old, the waning moon, that has all the knowledge that has gone into that position and is going towards death and rebirth. So it's a cyclic thing. And it's like cardinal, fixed, mutable. It's the same. It is the initiating, the sustaining, and then the preparing to go into another level. And the traditional mantra, is that same. The the and the So threefold thinking, you see, has got this flow to it. And so I suggest that if you use this idea, if you look for a third principle that is mercurial, tricksterish, it can be a clue to resolving these dualities. Because I point out that twofold thinking and fourfold thinking, like earth, air, fire, water, both tend to end up in stasis. Twofold thinking, it ends up as a battle, a war between two sides. Fourfold thinking tends to end up as stereotypes. You know, you get the idea of earth, air, fire, water. Oh, that's fun, you know, and you start to classify your friends. You know, he's an earthy type, you know. Or else my 4 female archetypes. Oh, she's obviously an Amazon, yes. And so everything she does is then seen in terms of Amazon. She's trapped in that, you see. But threefold thinking the mother isn't a type, it's a stage in development. And similarly with the other three, it's a moving system now. And you see both binaries and the sort of continuum binaries are both one-dimensional. As soon as you get that third point, which is off that line, you now have 2 dimensions to move in. Examples of how this works, well, it's really a question of sort of imagining what the possibility is. One example I gave was, two-party politics. Now, I based it on the British system, Labour, Conservative and Liberal, as it was long ago. So this example may not be very good, but let's say you've got, as in America, there's Democrats and Republicans. And you're a Republican, say, who's beginning to have doubts that, you see your party going too far, you don't like it much, anything. What can you do? Well, really, in a two-party system, all you can do is to become a Democrat. But you can't do that because it's you're a traitor, you're a turncoat. Where's he going to go next? It's sort of, in a binary system, it means going over to the enemy. You can't do that. Now, if there was a third party which offered something really different, then the whole process can begin to flow because the Republican can say, look, I'm absolutely for Republican ideas of business and entrepreneurship and small government and letting people sort of be independent, all that sort of thing. But I really actually like the way this third party handles that. I think they've got a more sort of open approach to it or something like that, whatever, or less combative or something. And so you could go to that other party. And people won't like it, they'll still be cross, but it's an easier move to make. And then from there, you could say, well, actually, I rather like the way the Democrats do it. You could move up there. It opens up the possibility of a flow. If I take that man-woman example, yes, as we know, sometimes a relationship is in deadlock, and then a child comes along and can be the solution because now you've both got something to focus on. But more fundamentally than that, I think that if very often what can save a relationship, they're just frozen up. It's become a stereotype. One person's the breadwinner and comes back exhausted at night, and then the other one wants to go out and have fun, having been stuck in the house all day, and all that sort of thing. The sort of typical things. The sort of solution tends to be when one or other rediscovers the child in themselves, which leads to the romantic idea. The man comes back and says, "Guess what? I've hired a motorbike for the weekend, and we're just going to ride off into the sunset like when we first met," or something. Something which sort of breaks the thing. And now, the trouble is when you start explaining things like that in a society that has been very much brought up along sort of scientific or formal religious lines, people always try to reduce it to a formula. Oh, I see, yes. What I should do at this point is to make a favourite meal and light candles. How many candles do you think I need? And I say, no, you see, the magic we're working is bringing the world to life. You've got to sort of really find that child in you that brought you together in the first place and allow it to work through you. Don't try to do what you think the child would do at this point. And it's difficult, It's not something I always manage to do, but that I think is the way to go. You sort of invoke that, that mercurial, childlike, the trickster thing in you, and then let it express itself. Yes, I mean, in the case of the rich and poor, it's very obvious that you would start to educate the family, and that's the way out of the poverty trap. It's not guaranteed, but it is the right sort of thing to be trying. So, what this, in summary, is saying that these binaries, which are so ingrained in our thinking, are actually tricks. That if you see the world as God, devil, trickster, you can be caught up in one of these things, whether it's a continuum that's been split in two or whether it's a real binary. And if you train yourself, you can discover a third principle, and then suddenly you've gone from a one-dimensional problem to a two-dimensional playing field where you can move around and you can do things. And that really is what I was exploring in The Good, the Bad, the Funny in great depth.